First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and honor for me to talk about something I'm so passionate about, and that's wood art. And basically, at this point in my career, I'm a wood sculptor, wood artist, wood turner, a little bit of a woodworker, a little bit of everything. And it's been a really wonderful journey for me. So I'm going to share part of that journey through my picture presentation and show you how and what has inspired me and how I've changed directions and how I've taken different series of work and combined them to come up with newer series of work. And a little bit of my path on how I've been selling and trying to sell for a long time. But we'll just dive right in and ask as many questions as you want. I'm going to give you a lot of information. I'm going to stop at a point. I'm going to do a little bit of a board lecture. And I'm going to talk about how you can take your own work to the next level. I'll show you how I did it through the photos. And just to give you some idea. So, we'll just dive right in. This is a walking path behind my house, and I'm really inspired. I love to walk in the woods. Sometimes after a stressful week of work, I'll go out on the weekends and I'll take a nice long walk. I have like a 30-acre woods that has a stream going through it, so it's wetlands. No one can ever build on it. No one owns. Someone owns it, but they don't use it, and kids don't play in it. So I store all my wood in the woods. Everything I do that you'll see tonight is all wet wood. I don't turn anything dry. It's dry, of course, once it's done, but even my carvings are all turned wet, completely wet, and then finished dry. So we'll get into that some more. And this is a picture of it in the winter. And that's the stream that they can't build on. Okay, so basically I'm going to talk about my journey from 2004 when I was making pens for a couple of years, having a lot of fun, to now 2019 where I'm doing sculptures. That's a 3-foot sculpture, and that represents probably about 60 hours of work to make that sculpture, and probably 2/3 of the work is sanding. It's filing and sanding. And I know as wood turners we like to minimize sanding. I've kind of gone the other way. All right, so where did it all start for me? I had shop class in grade school. After my father tragically died when I was about 9 1/2, we moved to Philly for a couple of years, and then we found out about this wonderful school called Milton Hershey School. Anybody ever heard of it?
Yeah, of course. You went there?
Yes.
Wow.
And basically, if you have 1 or 2 parents deceased, no income, and a good IQ, you can get in, and everything is absolutely, totally free. So they paid for everything: food, education, room and board. You stay there the whole year. And during the normal educational course, we had 4 years of woodworking. So I got the bug in 5th and 8th grade. Here's a picture of the original one in 1900s. So of course we had a much more modern shop.
Where are you?
You're never invited back.
This is one of the last projects I did there in 8th grade. That was a walnut lamp, all done by hand. And of course they had an incredible machine shop. They had an incredible woodworking shop. I also built model airplanes in grade school, so I was building with balsa wood and flying them. So I pretty much started early working with wood. So after 8th grade, I moved to Plymouth Meeting, and I went to high school. And I really didn't want to go the college prep route. And the main reason I didn't want to go to college is because you had to take languages. And I was really bad at French and German. So I said, I really want to be hands-on, I want to work with wood. So I said, all right, I want to be a carpenter. And they said, well, sorry, son, there's no openings, it's booked. But you can do drafting. And they said, drafting's a good idea because you learn how to do blueprints, and then next year you can transfer and do carpentry. So I started out doing drafting work. And eventually I did some architectural drafting and then mechanical drafting, and I really enjoyed the mechanical drafting. I said, this is really pretty cool, I like this. So the 2nd, 3rd year of high school, I stayed with that. I bought a Roadrunner, I was working, and I tore the engine apart and rebuilt it. But I always wondered how an engine really works beyond the physical limits, but how does it theoretically work? So anyway, long story short, I went to community college, Montgomery County, for 2 years, and I said, I want to convert now to college. I want to become an engineer. So I went nights and both summer terms. Then I transferred to Drexel, went 3 years, had all the core courses. I did 2 co-ops, but I never stopped taking courses to catch up. So after 5 years, I got my degree, and it was like one of the hardest things I ever did in my life. but it was what I wanted to do. So I became a mechanical engineer. So now I work for a company that builds foundry equipment, and I'm out. I actually have notes on the top. So I've been doing it for 37 years as a mechanical engineer. Mostly what I do is three-dimensional work today. So this is the terminal on the left. This is my office. The terminal on the left is Inventor 3D, which is made by AutoCAD, Autodesk. So I do 3D drawings, images, and then I project the 2D on another screen, print them out, and everything I design gets built. So everything's got to work. And when it doesn't work, I have to fix it. So it's very rewarding. So I'm used to designing and building. That's what I do all day, and that makes me tick. Example, what we build, that's a 15 metric ton furnace to melt iron inductively. It's done with a coil and large power supply, probably 7-8 megawatt power supply to power that. And we build them in our shop. This is a 3D printing of a furnace. So I can take a 3D drawing that I made and actually have it printed. So I did this for a 50-year anniversary present. It's a 1/40th scale model of a furnace that will melt iron. So I printed it out and painted all the pieces and put it together. So just to show you some of the things you can do today with CAD, and I started on the board twirling the pencil and doing it the hard way. So I just love it. I'm really thrilled about it. And I use it to help me in some of my design work. I do cooling systems, there's 3D drawings. Anyway, so that's what I do at work. This is my house in Burlington, New Jersey. Been there since '93. What's real important about it is I have this beautiful woods behind my house. And this is where I store all my wood. And kids don't play back there, no one bothers me, no one steals my wood. You can't get access, there's no other way around. So I have big deposits of wet wood back there that I have to replenish. So what I did was I started out, once I had my home, 94, I didn't have enough money to buy a dining room set, so I bought unfinished furniture. And I said, I really want to get back into woodworking. I want to do what I did in grade school, and I want to have my own shop. But before I do that, I'll start experimenting. So I bought all unfinished furniture, so everything in that dining room, I did the sanding, the staining, and the polyurethane. And I said, well, that was a lot of work. I'd really rather build it. So there was my furnace surround I did. I actually drew up and had the marble cut and installed it. And I started watching Norm Abrams. And really got hooked with New Yankee Workshop, got really excited about that and said, Andy makes it look easy, maybe I can do that, maybe I can really get back into woodworking. So I watched him for years, and then later David Marks came along. Now some of you may know that David Marks is really more of a wood turner today, but he's a fabulous woodworker. He does everything in exotic woods. He did 9 seasons of a show called Woodworks. So basically these two guys inspired me to get back into woodworking. Okay. So I said, okay, this is really what I want to do. I spend too much time working with it. So I said, all right, I'm going to start buying tools. But I have a basement shop with limited access. So I had to take all the tools apart, bring them down a staircase that wraps around. See this here? So if you go and buy a 4x8 sheet of plywood, you can't get it around these steps. Or a 12-foot board that you're going to plane down, you can't get it around the steps. So I'm really kind of limited. And if the house was new, so I could do anything I wanted to the basement. So what I did was I was very frustrated watching Norm build all these walkout basements, and I said, what can I do to my basement? Well, the classic solution is to cut through your back wall, dig down 10 feet, put stairs in, put a metal Bilco door in, and hope it doesn't leak. And you don't really have, it's not really ideal. So one day I came up with inspiration after watching Norm, and I said, if I walk up the steps, what's behind this wall? So I drilled a hole in the wall, measured everything, and I said, I'm between 2 concrete slabs, I'm 5 foot in the air. If I cut the wall there, I only have 4 feet of concrete, 4 by 4 feet of concrete to cut through 8-inch wall. So that's what I did. So I blew a hole in the side of my house, as you can see there. Fortunately, my wife took photos. And then I hung a pre-hung door, and that's what it looks finished on the outside. And I put a drain in. And then that's a straight shot down into the basement. So now once I had a straight shot in the basement, I said, now I can build my dream shop. So then there's my 3 amigos at the time looking out the door. So I had a nice pre-hung door with light and a straight shot outside. So now that's what it looks like, all filled up with equipment. So I built a full panel shop basically. There's a bench I reworked. 12-foot wood racks, my first lathe I didn't know how to use, and then built a panel saw, cabinet, router cabinet, and so on and so forth. Real neat and clean there, it never looked like that again after I took the photos. So now I have, you know what happens with time, you fill up your shop with tools and then you fill up wood in every available spot, and then you pile some more wood and then more dust on it. So I won't show you any live pictures today. So I started out with some simple projects, cork boards, I probably made a couple dozen of those, bread boxes, signs, router cabinet, you know, shelves, did a real nice walnut table, curly walnut, big cabinet with plywoods, because now I can take those 4x8 sheets down. I wanted to go to that place, Festal, they wouldn't sell me anything. This was 20 years ago. They said, we don't sell to people in garage shops, or whatever. You gotta be a professional, so I could never buy from them back then. So anyway, long story short, I ended up building this large entertainment center for my living room. I spent 6 months, nights and weekends, while I'm working, and I took plans I found for a bookshelf and I made an enclosed cabinet out of it. And I extended it a couple feet in each direction. So, ton of work. I said, after I did that, I said, I think I made a mistake. I said, I don't know that I really want to do woodworking now. It's just so much work and I just don't have enough time to dedicate to it. But I built an entire shop to do it. So along the journey, I went down to Penn State and I bought a lot of dust collection equipment. I grabbed some pen kits. So on a Christmas week I was off, I started playing with pens. And I said, wow, pens are pretty cool. I could buy a small piece of exotic wood. I don't have to spend $200 at the hardwood store. I could buy little pens. So I did that for 2 years. I went nuts with it. So that's what I did with my lathe. Did every type of pen kit imaginable. And I said, okay, now I'm going to do bowls. Bowls are fun. Bowls are pretty awesome, actually. So I did some crappy bowls there. And then 2006, I said, I'm going to buy a real lathe now. And I can't afford it, but if I quit smoking, the money I save will pay for that. I quit smoking on the first try, never smoked again, and it paid for that lathe in no time.
Good.
Especially that was 2006.
Good.
So I was motivated, so that was cool. And then of course, you know, I always bribe the wife and say, all this money I'm spending, I'm going to make you gifts. And if that's if you need to sell it on how to get to your spouse to buy stuff, just tell them you're going to make them gifts. So every wedding, we had great gifts. Every birthday, you know, any occasion, I make them bowls, vases, whatever. And it really went over well. Then I said, okay, I'd like to approach a hollow form. So that was kind of a dumpy vase, not good shape. This was my very first hollow form. Wood was nice, horrible shape, but it worked, I didn't break it. So I said, all right, I got to learn how to make them better. And we'll talk about form. I think that was my second, another one bad form, too pointy,
Baloney.
big color. What's that?
Baloney. Horrible shape.
Oh, it is?
Baloney.
Well, we'll talk about it. It's important that you understand that. So then I started going a little bit bigger. This is my first box elder piece I made. But I was doing everything by hand. Okay, back then the lasers were just starting to come out. There wasn't that many tapes on how to learn how to do hollowing. So it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of broken pieces. But I started out making the openings bigger intentionally so I could get the process down of carving out the inside. And once I got the process down, I said, okay, now I can shrink it down without breaking the piece, finishing it. Then I ran into a wonderful artist, Don Derry, out of Washington, and he had this wonderful little hollowing tool. Very simple to use. He did a demo. I think it was at Phil's shop at one time, and I said, I need to buy that tool. And then, just when he started, and then by the end of the demo, I said, I don't want you to go home with that. I will buy it before you leave.
And you stopped eating so you could afford it.
I stopped eating so I could afford it. So I bought that and several others. So then I started, basically my shop, which was a cabinet shop, now started to turn into a wood turning shop. So I started cranking out. I went crazy with hollow forms. When I really started to get good at it, I was doing 2 a week. And that meant I was working nights and all weekends. And I was still doing my 40 hours of work and 10 hours of commuting. But I just went at it with a vengeance. I just was having a ball with it. It was just a lot of fun.
The wife works nights, right, usually?
Yes, she works nights, yes, and that helps. Someone said to me the other day, how does your wife put up with this? I said, well, she works nights. I said, and when do you see her? I said, okay, Wednesday night and Saturday and Sunday. And they're like, oh, that's not bad. I said, yeah, it works for me. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do when I retire. You know, I see her all the time. I might have to kill her, but, you know, we'll go from there. So, no, we get along well. And so then, the very first show I was in was Perkins, and it was set up through this club. And it was not the Perkins in Collingswood, and that was 2007. So now I was able to make them without breaking them. So that's 2 shots, and I sold like 3 pieces. So I said, I'm off and running. This is kind of cool. I can make vases and sell them, put my name on them. At least I get some return on all the equipment and money I'm spending. So you can see I just started cranking them out. I still didn't have the bottoms quite fixed right. We'll talk about that. And then by the end of 2007, I was in a Works of Wood exhibit in New Hope. It's a juried show. I don't know if anyone been up there. You should know about this, and you should go to the shows. Hey, Fred in the back. Fred's been up there. And they really helped me out dramatically in my career. All their shows are juried, meaning you submit pictures, and they have to be picked by 2 artists that they pick for the show. So it's not a given that you get in. Now I've been in that show 13 years in a row, but my very first show was one of my best. You apply with 5 pieces, you're lucky if you get in 1. They took all 5 and asked me to supply more. I brought 8. I sold all 8 pieces, and the 8th piece went to Mira Nakashima, which I would have given to her just to say I was in her collection. So I was like, wow, I'm an artist, I can make money at this. Well, that was 2007. You know what happened in 2008? It was the dot-com crash and the economy crashed. So that was the end of that dream. I was lucky to sell 1 or 2 that year. But I started off with a bang, and it was a lot of fun. So these are some of the pieces that sold. So then I started making them bigger. Okay, these are 15 to 16 inches tall. Very difficult to make because basically you're hanging off the lathe at that distance, and you have to do them start to finish wet, and I always spray them down when I do them to keep them wet. If you take a break for lunch, spray it down, wrap them up. If I can't finish it that day, I'll have to finish it the next morning. I wet it down, wrap it with saran wrap. It stays wet the whole time. The problem is when you get down to the very bottom, you have to have about 1/8 inch wall thickness all the way down, and that piece is that big. When you get down to the bottom is about when you're tired and when it's the weakest, and it's when it wants to break. So most people who try these big ones may make 1 or 2 and break a lot of them and get frustrated and never do it again. So I was able to get the process down through practice and perseverance. And I didn't break that many. I got pretty handy at it. And then later I got into the lasers, which helped a lot. So I started making a lot of ambrosia pieces. Then I bought a bigger rig, and that's the monster rig. And unfortunately Randy's no longer alive. I don't even know if anyone makes it anymore. But that worked out pretty good for these bigger ones. And then I ran into an old friend from high school, and this was his woodlot over in Pennsylvania, and I went nuts. I went absolutely nuts, yeah. And I used to just load up my truck and come back. So that's a wood turner's dream. That lasted for about 4 or 5 years, and then I found someone else locally, so I didn't have to travel an hour and a half. And then unfortunately, he got out of the business. He wasn't doing that anymore. But I used to fill up my truck. You know, I would go to town, and that was some box elder that we all love. Okay, and this is just a small fraction of the wood that's in the woods behind my house. I should have put a more recent one. Right now, that would be 1 aisle. Okay, and I got about 6 or 8 aisles going in the woods. So I store all my wood in the woods. Now, what that does, the rain keeps it wet, the shade keeps the sun off of it, and I don't bother waxing the ends anymore. I used to do that and just go through 5-gallon drums of wax. I just set them on a sliced piece of wood. So when I cut a big log, I'll take a little 1/4 inch slice, and that goes on the ground. And so that's the first slice I take off. And then the last slice I take off, that's the top piece. So I stack them vertically, don't put any wax on them at all. So they're sitting on wood and capped with wood. And that's enough with the range that you don't have to wax them. When I take the piece to use it, I cut off like 2 inches from the end and make sure there's no cracks at all. If there's cracks, then I cut more off. So that's how I preserve all my wood, and I don't have to spend all that time waxing them. And then, this was earlier, 2009, I was in a local article, second article. I think this was the last project I made was a walnut shelf so I could put my hollow forms on. That was like 1 inch thick, like 4 feet long. That's in my house today. And then I just start going crazy, just lots of hollow forms, lots of hollow forms. I love ambrosia maple, and I'll show you later where I actually dye it, what you can do with dye. A couple of these I sold at the wood turning center. And then one of the things that's really, really important, well, let me say 2 things. The best thing you can do is keep woodworking or keep wood turning and keep trying to get better. But if you really want to sell, you got to put a lot of time and effort. And it really isn't for everyone. And a lot of times people say, is it worth all the work you do? I said, for me it is. But I said, for most people, you're better off having fun and making a lot of bowls and whatever you enjoy doing. Learn as much as you can, do as many different things as you can, and try and sell a little. But the minute you say, I really want to sell, and I have to sell to pay for my equipment, then it becomes a job and no longer as much fun. So I'm not there, but I do enjoy selling. So I don't mind doing all the work. I'm going to tell you a lot of things that I do to make it better, to try and get better so that you can sell. But you don't have to do all these things if you're just having fun making bowls and you sell a couple and you're happy with that. So different strokes for different folks. But one of the most important things you need to do is if you're trying to get into a show, you have to take good pictures. You have to learn how to be a good photographer, and it's too expensive to pay photographers unless you've got a friend that will do it for you cheaply. So it's important to learn photography, and that took a while for me, but now I have that down. Here's the trio sets that I used to do. And then in 2008, I went to my first AEW symposium, and I went nuts. I said, this is what I want to do. I want to get really good at this, and I want to go to the symposiums, and I want to try and sell my work. I want to try and get magazines, and I got really motivated. So that was my very first, and I think I've gone to 10 or 11. And this is my golden retriever, Dylan, who's got a little bit of a drinking problem, but he's here to remind us that we need to have fun while we're doing all this. Because, you know, it's not all about making money, it's all about having fun. So it's also a reminder I just want to talk about some techniques which you can use to try and take your work to the next level, and then I'll show you how I have applied these ideas to more of my work. What's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me. So I'm just going to give you a brief. Where are we time-wise? We're only a half hour in, that's pretty good. Okay, one of the most important things you need to do is always improve shape and form, and we'll get back to that. It has to be right. The shape has to be right for someone who want to buy an inexpensive piece. Now I'm talking about anything over $200–300. You really need to do a good job on shape and form. You can create a lot of variation in your work by the orientation of the grain that you use, and I'll show you that. You can use local woods with open grain. You don't have to spend money on burls. I mean, it's great when you find one if you can get it for free, but you don't say, okay, I have to have burls to make a piece that sells. That's not true. And most of my work, probably 95% of my work, I don't use burls at all because I'm too cheap to buy them. If I'm lucky enough to find them free, I'll use them, but I won't buy them. So I'll do everything else to color it, texture it, to make it look exotic. So you can take local woods, you can add texturing, coloring, branding, piercing, all these things you've seen demonstrators come here and show you how to do. You can burn or make groove patterns, you can turn and carve shapes. Huge opportunity in carving, and I'll show you what I've done with carving. You can add multiple elements. It doesn't have to be one piece turned on the lathe. It could be several pieces cut and glued together and put together. Okay, so where do you find your ideas? It's nice to look at all the wood turning magazines and all the woodworking magazines, but those things are done. They're nice to look at. They're better places to find ideas, I think. Nature and man-made objects, you look for shapes. Study shapes everywhere you go and look for inspirations of how you could use those shapes in the work that you do. Look at patterns and coloring. If you go up on a mountainside and look down the side of the mountain, you can see how the grass was cut or patterns that are made. Take pictures of it. Study wood art. Study magazines. Go to exhibits. A good place to start when you're doing a lot of wood turning is a website called DelVal.com. If you want people to actually online critique you, you can get a lot of good information. But don't believe everything you hear, but it's good to get into those conversations. WoodCentral.com is a good place. And then, of course, the AAW forum is a good place to see what other woodturners are doing. But you should go out and you should study art, okay? You should go to exhibits of all types. Look at ceramic, glass, metal, stone, and look at paintings for inspirations on shapes and ideas. I like to do a lot of Googling of images, okay? I spend a lot of time on Pinterest. And you can go on Pinterest and you can say, all right, I want to see wood sculptures, I want to see stone sculptures, I want to see ceramic sculptures, and all hundreds and hundreds of pictures will pop up. So you look at those and you start collecting ones you like. But don't take one and say, I'm going to copy it. Just say, well, I like a piece of this with a piece of this, and maybe I'll put some of my own texture in, and all of a sudden now you create your own shape or style. That could be yours. So that's kind of what I do a lot. And Instagram's also a good place for finding pictures very quickly, very easily. I've gone out and bought sculpture books and there's like a couple good pictures in them, and that was a waste of money. And within 5 minutes, I can literally download hundreds of photos to give me inspiration on what I might want to do. And I'll show you where I applied that. Okay, a little bit about proportions are critical in sculpture and in all types of vessels and bowls and everything else. Proportions, just some guidelines, the golden mean, everyone, 1.618 to 1 or 1.6 to 1. Basically, if you have a vase that's 16 inches tall, if you have a 10-inch OD and a nice curve to it, it has an aesthetically nice proportion because it's close to the golden mean, which is 1.6. A lot of information on the internet. Study up on that. The Parthenon was built based on that principle. It goes back to the ancient Greeks, maybe even earlier than that. Scott can tell you all about that. So you can use those as ratios to help you. When you do your curves, you always want the curve to be flowing. You don't want any straight spots, unless you're intentionally making a straight vase. And then if you make a straight vase, it better be straight and not a little bit curved. So basically what you're trying to do when we wood turning, you want a flowing curve. You don't want any dead spots. Like my first vase, it came down and boop, sat flat on the table and it looked flat. You want that shape to go around like it would go through the table. I do a lot of modeling with catenary curve. Catenary curve is basically a chain. So if you take a dog chain and hold it, that loop it makes is a catenary curve. And then you can move it back and forth and you'll get basically, and then you can trace it, you can make a family of nice, aesthetically pleasing curves. So anything like a necklace is natural. It has a nice flow to it. So bowls and vases look great, or vessels look great with that kind of shape. And that's what I've always strived for. And then you're aware of the rule of thirds, 1/3 height. And we'll come back. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the tree, and then I'll come back to some photos. All right. So imagine you're driving down the road. You got 2 hours of daylight left. You got 2 chainsaws in your truck. You're by yourself, and you find this beautiful tree laying on the ground. It's yours for the taking. It's too big. You can't take it all. You would probably need about 6 trips. Where would you start first to think about what you're going to cut? Because you can't take it all. What areas would, and those of you who've seen this before, don't answer. What area would you investigate first? Because you're running out of daylight.
Hey.
Hey.
A? Okay, E? E's a good choice. I would check D first, because I see a little bit of waviness in the bark. Could be potentially a burl. You don't find too many, but when you do, sometimes they sneak up on you. But what happens with a burl, something infects the tree like a bug or a fungus, and then the tree grows unnatural in that space. And you get all kinds of rays when you slice it open. You've seen it out of these burls. A lot of times you just see a burl lopped off, and they sell it that way, right? I like the entire piece, because what I'll do, I'll take that and I'll make my vase. I'll put the prettiest spot up top, and then I'll make my vase shape out of it. Now, of course, you want to slice it up and get as many as you want, as many pieces as you can, but you have to make a choice. Do I want one big one, or do I want a bunch of small pieces? But when you take basically the fillet out of it, there's not a whole lot left. But even the rest of the wood is kind of interesting too. So if you're lucky enough to find a burl, you take that first. The next spot, and where I do most of my work, is in the base of the tree. Because down along the base of the tree is where the figure gets real curly. the stress of the tree being moving. Same up here, you get a curly figure up in here, of course in the crotch. But this is also, I find the base of the tree a lot, because the firewood cutters, it takes too much work to cut it. It takes more saw cuts. They'll usually cut the straight grain, chop, 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 throw it in the truck and go. This takes a lot more work. So I, by default, over the years, would always find here in the crotch, and then I realized, wow, the figure in this is beautiful. It's really great. So, plus you get a lot more sapwood, and you get a little bit of grain spread on it. And it's also pretty stable too. So this is a good place for, that's basically where I do all my hollow form work. And then occasionally I'll do a crotch piece. Now the crotches will move as they dry. Walnut's fairly stable. And then you can even take pieces around, little branches, because there's some nice curly figure on each side. And then if you want to do straight grain, if that's all you got, then you sandblast it, dye it, color it, whatever you want to do. But if you want figure in the wood, the base of the tree is the ideal spot for most of what I get. Recently, my wood guy retired. He came to my last show and said, I'm finally going to retire. And I'm like, oh, man. So he's done. So what I ended up doing, what I'm going to do, is I got a permit for the, what's called the Fairmount Park wood dump in Philly. And I thought because I was in New Jersey, they wouldn't let me go in. So I looked online, and you can apply for a free permit. You can go there, and you can fill up your truck, and it's $15 for a fill up of your truck for firewood. So it's just only open during the day, and it's only open in the morning on Saturdays. So I could only go on Saturdays, but those of you who are lucky enough to be retired, you can go during the day. So that's a good source of where you could get wood. It's just a little far to go to, but they have a huge selection of wood there. And you can bring your own chainsaw. Like I said, all you have to do is go online, fill out the form, and you can go get free wood. I think you have to cart it a little bit. You might have to bring a little cart. So
Don't you have enough in your woods?
What's that?
Don't you have enough back in your
Well,
woods?
in my woods, the wood is not, the trees aren't old enough. Literally what I'm using 3 and 4 foot diameters is what I'm looking for the big pieces. It sounds crazy, but that's really what works the best for what I'm doing. So I don't want to cut any trees back there, because then I might call attention to myself. So right now, no one cares what I'm doing, but someone does own that, does own that land. So, okay, another thing that's really important, if you want to go on and you want to do shows, every time you fill out an exhibit application, they ask you if you have a website. So websites are a lot of work. I did my own, a lot of work, but you have to have good photography to put on the website to have a good website. So I have gone through and done all those things, learned how to do it and did it. Here's a picture of Angelina Jolie, just to play on the golden mean. Someone's figured out how to apply the golden mean in 3 dimensions, and to figure out, they made a mask to say that this is the ideal symmetric form for a beautiful woman. And they've done tests where they've taken the top models and they put this 3D mask over, and they matched really well. So the people who selected the models have an eye, it's 4 proportions, before they learned how to make the mask. So I thought that was really cool, that studying something well enough, you can figure it out. Okay, then I start doing a lot more vases. Ambrosia maple is one of my specials. Start doing trios. Never sold a trio. This was a nice one. A friend gave me a cedar tree. I made him a hollow form as a gift. He came back and he bought 4 for his kids. So that was nice. And then I think I made one for my mom, and I think I got one for my wife, and then I was left with a little one for some reason. I don't know how that happened. So I got the short end on that. But that's all right. More trios. You can see the curly figure. Okay, that wood is from the base. Okay, and that color is from actual rot in the base. I didn't add color on that one. So when I first started out, I did a lot of natural work. Okay, this is spalted oak, so I didn't add any color to it. It was just beautiful, but I sandblasted it. Okay, to open up the grain. There's some curly walnut. And then I started saying, okay, instead of just doing natural wood, what else can I do? So I said, I'm going to start bleaching pieces. So that's ambrosia maple, ambrosia spalted maple, bleached. So it has a nice doesn't look as white as it is because of the screen, but it's actually a little bit whiter. So it's kind of like a ghost image. And I had that in an AAW show early. Then I was asked to write an article in their New Zealand woodworking magazine, so that was pretty cool. Okay, so the other point about articles, if you want to become and sell a lot of work, you need to publish articles. You need to build an artist's resume by going and getting accepted to art shows. So all of these things were in my plan early out. How do I start building that resume? How do I get into more exhibits? And also, how do I become different? How do I pull away from the herd and say, this is an Andy DiPietro piece, and this could be anybody's piece? So prior to any of the additional embellishments I was doing on my hollow forms, they could have looked like anyone else's. There would be no way for you to say, well, before it was bleached, like that one, whose piece is that? There's many people who can make that. And so there's no way to differentiate who did it, which is still hard to do. So I was trying to find a style that was mine. So I started bleaching, I got an article which was important. Then I started sandblasting. So when I first bought my cabinet, sandblasting was new, and I think there were a couple other wood turners sandblasting, and I went, I need to do this. We had one at work in our metal shop, and I begged the shop manager to let me do some blasting on wood. He would not let me do it. He said, you're not going to gum up my machine? No way. So I really wanted to test it, because I said, oak should sandblast well. It should work. So I said, screw it, I'm just going to buy it. So I went out, and I think I remember it was like a bad year, and I was like, I don't know if the economy's going to, my job's going to survive. But I said, you know what, I need to do this now. So I made some choices when I had the ideas, regardless of what else was going on, and said, okay, I'm just going to spend the money to do it. Now the cabinet wasn't much, but the 80-gallon compressor was.
So you stop changing underwear so you can afford the.
Yeah, so there's the 80-gallon compressor, $2,000 right there, boom.
Yeah.
On a whim, saying, is this going to work? Is it worth it? I just went for it. I said, screw it. I'm going to just buy and get what I need and hope for the best. And I have to say, after all these years of all the work, of all the pieces I've sold, not as many as I would like, I've easily paid for all my equipment in my shop and all the finishes and all the wood that I've ever used. And that wasn't really that important, but it was nice to be able to say that I'm beyond break even now, which is really cool. So this was one of the first ones I sandblasted. So I didn't really like the color of it, but I liked the texture of it. It was really cool. So then I pickled it. And that's called, it's called pickling, where you take like a white primer and use 1 part primer and 3 parts water. So it's like a whitewash. So I whitewashed it white because you can't really bleach it that well. Oak doesn't, it gets kind of yellow when you bleach it, but I wanted it bright white. And I said, well, okay, that looks cool. And I did a series of them. And then I said, let me add some black patinating wax. And I did a black and white, and that sold to a collector. So it was really. So I did a series of those. Actually, I did some big ones and sold to another friend of mine. He bought 2 of those. But what happens here by sandblasting, it's going deep into the soft grain. So when I put the patinating wax, it goes in deep. So it's not just the offset in color, it's a textural feel to it. So when you feel it, you're like, oh, this feels really good. Instead of a smooth surface, it's a nice surface. So I said, okay, maybe this is some of my signatures. So then I went on and bought a bigger cabinet. That's a 4-foot cabinet. That's the one I use all the time. And a 3-foot one buried back behind there, and it lays over here. So now you can start seeing I got turnings all over my shop. I could never make another cabinet in my shop now. There's too much crap in the way. There's too many other tools and wood and everything else. So those days are over, unless I want to make a little bread box. This was a piece I had at Wood Turning, when it was called the Wood Turning Center. Albert really liked that one. Didn't sell, then it broke. He actually sold these 2. The tip broke. These 2 sold there. So same idea, this was sassafras. Somebody here had sassafras. So I turned a few of these. And sassafras, when you sandblast it, you can really get deep in it because it's soft. Dyed it green, and then rubbed in.
How big is it?
Well, I'm sorry?
How big is it?
It's about that big.
Sassafras.
The tree was about 44 inch
Yeah, so
diameter.
big tree, big tree. He got tons of board feet out of it. So the idea was the sandblast on soft grain opens it up more. So then I put the white liming wax in. So that gave it pop. So I came up with the idea, I need pieces that have pop. visual stimulus. So if I put that in a gallery, and you walk, say it's all the way across the room in the gallery, and you walk in the door, I want your eye to pull over to that piece. That's what I'm looking for. People like the natural wood, but it didn't grab your attention from across the room. So that was the idea I came up with. I said, I need something that's different that will pull your attention to. And I've sold both, don't get me wrong, but I've sold more that are colored and textured than I have that are natural finish.
What's the process that you go through?
What, to dye it?
Yeah, to dye it, sandblast it, the wax.
Okay, I
What
sandblast
comes
first.
second?
When it's dry, I sandblast it when it's dry, after you know the whole hollowing process.
Yeah.
Then I dye it, then I seal it with a, and everyone likes to disagree with me, I seal with a water-based lacquer that works with wax. There's one made, there's only one manufacturer that makes it special. I seal it with that, then I put liming wax on it. But when you put liming wax on it, you'll get too much into the body of it. So then I take beeswax and I cut it back so that I just get it where I want it. And then I seal it with this water-based lacquer made by Mohawk Finishing. And so then, because you don't want the liming wax to come out.
The inside, do you express any concern about the inside? Is there any kind of finish at all on the
Nope.
inside?
Nope.
You leave it raw?
Leave it raw, because I want it to breathe. Some people will paint the inside, but you gotta be careful. You start adding too much moisture, this thing will crack. It'll start acting like a log again. So you don't want to soak the piece, you want to lightly wet it with the color, because you will crack it. And from my point of view, and most people's point of view that sell them, you can't have a cracked vase. You should not have a crack, especially if you're charging, I mean, that was like a $1,500 vase, it was not a cheap vase. So there should be no cracks at all, and it should be sanded perfectly. And just because you sandblast it doesn't mean you don't have to sand. I have to sand it really well up to 220, no scratches. Because once I put the liming wax on it, it'll be a telltale. It'll pick up every little scratch. So there's a lot of sanding that goes into these. But then you can charge accordingly.
And you gotta make it nice and clean all the inside too, in case people look
Oh,
in there
yeah.
and play with it.
Oh yeah, your insides don't have to be perfect, but they have to be smooth. And if they're smooth, relatively smooth, then they won't warp on the outside. But they don't have to be glass sanded or, just where you put your finger, because everyone sticks their finger in. This is one I called Park Avenue. I just sold that a couple of years ago. That was a big beast. So that's become a signature series for me, that people know my name by these. I'm not the only one that does them, but I'm one of the few that do them that long. So I stretch the catenary curve. I intentionally exceed the golden mean. That's more like 2 to 1, right? That's not 1.6 to 1. I intentionally stretch it. So that's why I said the golden mean is a guideline, but then this is art. We can do whatever we want. We have artistic license. So I stretch them, and then I use these really round bottoms. It looks like they're going to fall over, but that bottom's about 2 inches because I undercut it. It just looks like it's unstable, but it is stable.
Andy,
Yes, sir.
when you do a catenary curve, do you make a template from that? And
You can.
put that against?
Absolutely,
the work?
absolutely. When you're first doing it, make a template. Or hang a chain, or draw a
Yeah.
sketch on the wall above where you're turning. So like, if you're turning, you can look up sideways. Absolutely make templates. I did that when I started, and then once you start getting the hang of it, you don't have to do it anymore. But that's an excellent point. This is a piece of oak, sandblasted. I think I dyed it red, and then I put black patinating wax, so the red with the black turned it brown. So I call it black and tan. That's my black and tan series. So you get into all kinds of interesting color combinations. This was turned on the pith center, which is a real bear to do, and probably about like 1 out of 3 will just crack. This you have to do completely wet. It has to have no cracks in the beginning. You gotta take it start to finish, and then when it's all done, you let it dry slowly on the basement floor and just hope it doesn't split apart on you. As long as you have it thin and uniform, and you cross your fingers. But I had a couple of those work out nicely. So they make a nice pattern, sandblasted, dyed red, black patinating wax, and then I get the black and tan look. Another one, I think it was a little darker red with the black patinating wax, again sandblasted. I think you can see the depth of the grain here. Can you notice that? If you didn't sandblast it, it wouldn't look that deep. It wouldn't have that textural feel to it. So that was becoming my signature that pretty much everything I do is sandblasted. Okay, so we'll continue on. And then I said, all right, what about changing form? Let me try some other ideas. I kind of like the idea of a sailboat sail. I like the curve to it. So I said, let me make a platter. A platter, and then bandsaw it out, sandblast it, do all the colors. So this was a quarter sawn piece. See the rays in here? So it's another one of the signature things I do. I cut the wood in the quarter sawn plane so that I can maximize that grain and make it pop. That shows all the way across the room when you see that color combination. So I dye it black, sand it, hand sand it back. I'm sorry, stop. Platter, cut out, sandblast, dye it black, sand it back, dye it red, sand it back, and then put a little yellow on it, and then put a finish on it. So that's kind of my quick process to get all that color range. I'm looking for a range of colors, and I want the colors to go in deep, not just on the surface. So that's what the sandblasting allows me to do. And then I said, all right, let me start carving through it. So that was another, never sold it, but I have it on my wall. I like it. So this one I carved through. So that was another spin-off idea. See how I'm kind of building on the ideas? I started out saying, all right, I'm sandblasting, opening up the surface. So then the next logical thought was, well, what if I want to go all the way through the surface? Then I create shadows. So I call them, then I did a whole series of vases like that, which I called shadow catcher. Actually, you can see it here. See the shadow over here? I thought that was really cool. And then I started doing vessels where I would cut through, just a ton of work. I mean, I had to use all these little cutters to get in here. It was a lot of work. Did a black one, and then that broke at an exhibit, so I haven't figured out what I want to do with it yet. So anyway, so I started doing a lot of shows. This was turning, got an award, which was kind of nice. So again, if you can collect awards, it goes on your resume. You start building your artist resume. It's important. So then in 2010, these two distinguished gentlemen decided to do a critique. They walked around randomly, and each one picked up one of my vases. They didn't know who I was. I obviously knew who they were. It's Ellsworth and Giles Gilson, if I'm saying that right, or Giles Gilson, who passed away. Two famous artists. And Jeff got this on videotape. Jeff was standing next to me with his video camera, audio and video. And Ellsworth said, I absolutely love this piece. He nailed the shape. I went, Jeff, did you get that? I said, got it. So I have the recording of Ellsworth, saying I did a great job, which was like a huge moment for me. I'm like, wow. The master said I did a great job. That's really cool. So that, of course, that just energized me more and said I got to keep going. And then they talked about they each loved both pieces, and I was like, oh, thank you so much. So that was a defining moment in 2010. So then I started doing more of what I call my pinstripe series, the sandblasting, dyeing, and liming, and all that. And that's been successful for me. And then this is a recent piece I did for an exhibit down the Blue Spiral 1 in Asheville. So that's going to open up the same weekend that the AEW opens up. So I have two pieces down there. So that was big. That's another one that was probably about that big. And which was cool about this, I didn't have to turn a new piece. I took, I think this was a piece of ash that I had on my shelf that I hadn't sold. And I went, you know what, it's got a cool pattern. I'm just going to sand off the six layers of finish on it, sandblast it, after I did all that work, color it, and then put a lime wax on it. And the piece came out real nice, so I was real thrilled about that. I didn't have to turn a new one, I just converted one. Here's one I sandblast, dyed black, I rub in bronze powder. So I mix bronze powder in with the finishes. So now I'm starting to experiment with all different things that you could possibly do. Mixing, this is dyed green, bronze powder in it. And that's kind of the patina on it. I guess you get a good idea from that. That's about what it looks like. So that was kind of a cool piece. And then I came up with this idea when I was first coloring. I said, is there a way I can make oak look like Coca-Cola? So I experimented with it. So I sandblast, dyed black, sand it back, dye it red, sand it back. Now, you understand when I say sand it back? I hand sand it back because you get too much dye on the wood and it hides the beauty of the wood. It hides the grain in the figure. So by lightly sanding it back, I bring the wood figure back through the excess dye, and then I'll add a little bit more of another color. So then I add yellow. And so I came up with this idea, I said, you know, I'll call it Okabola. And I thought it was kind of corny, but it stuck. And to this day, I've had people come up, oh, you're the Okabola guy. And I said, that's pretty cool, because you know, I got noted for something that, so I did this piece, same way. And that was in a New Jersey museum show. I'm trying to look for the article. This was a burl, okay? Huge burl. The point was down here, okay? And you can see where the rays went out. I intentionally went on an angle, because sometimes I play, I'm going to say, I'm going to risk the shape moving. If you don't get the grain uniform, when it dries, it can twist on you. But every once in a while, I would take a risk, because burls are fairly stable when they dry. I said, I'm going to have it on an angle, because I wanted the grain on an angle, and I wanted the rays to shoot up. So I'll always play with angles and different positions and see what the effect is. And that piece sold pretty quickly, so that was nice. And then I did a collaborative piece with, I didn't do the carving, with Keith Holt, who does these fabulous masks. So what I did was I cut 2 pieces quarter sawn, shipped them to him. He did the carving, shipped them back to me. I sanded them, sandblasted them, and then did my dye process. And we each have one in our homes. And I'll never sell it, because it was such a cool thing to do. And I was like honored to, like, Christ, Keith worked on my piece. That's pretty cool, you know. So he's a pretty well-known artist now. And then I wrote this article. So that was my Okabola vessel trio that, you know, that went around, and then people got to know me about that. So that was kind of cool. So again, that's in my artist resume. It's in my box. And you would be surprised, collectors will read my portfolio that's going around. They read them. I notice, I can look on my website and see who looks at, I don't know who looked at it, but I know what they looked at. And they're always looking at my resume, what shows I was in, and my artist statement. So even though like, it's a pain in the ass to write that stuff, it's important. And it's important to do it with feeling. And people who are going to spend a lot of money want to know that you're not just making a couple in your basement, you're committed to being an artist. And so if they get that feel, that helps them with the possibility of a sale. So this was dyed blue and yellow. So same process, sandblast, dyed black, sand it back, dyed blue, sand it back, add a little yellow, and then 5 or 6 coats of finish on it. I like to use bush oil, because it really makes the wood soft, and it's a lighter amber color compared to, what's the other one that always hardens all the time, Phil, that we used to use? That most of the woodworkers use.
Waterlocks?
Waterlocks, yeah. Whereas bush oil stays, doesn't dry up like waterlocks does. And it's, I think, a little less expensive too. So I really like the bush oil. And then I started doing highly figured pieces. Now this was taken again from the base of a walnut, of a maple tree. The curly figure was so intense that it's really, it's a little more than curl. It's I think what's the right word. And here was another one I did that was in a show, and I did eventually sell that one too. That was when some of them, you know, you look at and go, I'll never get that wood again. Maybe I should have kept it. It's like, but what you got to do? Of course, the piece you love the most is the one that would be the easier one to sell. This is one that's in my collection. Quilted was the word I was looking for. So there's a piece of quilted maple, and you can see what the dye does. It really makes it pop. And you know how you see a guitar, like a rock star guitar? The perimeter is all dyed, and then on a curly maple, that's what makes it look so cool. So that adds value, tremendous value to the piece, compared to just an ordinary piece of wood, just by adding the color to it. Some more oak. I did a lot of work with oak. Gratuitous dog shot, just to show you should have fun. Curly ash, dyed blue. The piece has a lot of pop to it. Ambrosia maple. Remember I mentioned I loved ambrosia maple? I started dyeing ambrosia maple. And I still have, I almost sold this piece this weekend, but she went for another one. That's okay. But it had so much figure in it, and I actually brush on the dye, and then I sand it back to get the figure to come back through. I lightly sand it back, and then I put like, I don't know, 5 or 6 coats of bush oil on it, make it a little bit shiny. I don't like them real shiny, but just a little bit shiny. So it just gives you some ideas of what you could do for your pieces.
What grit, when you sand back, what grit are you using?
Probably like 320 or something like that.
Just 320 and.
Yeah, I'd kiss it just to get enough off, and then wipe it down, and then, you know, check over spots, and, you know. This was a crotch, a maple crotch, up in this area here, that came out real, that's a big one. Okay. I think it was like 10 by 16 or something like that. And I put a big opening in it, and it's fine, you know. Sometimes you can get away with a big opening, other times, if you go too big an opening, it'll twist on you, and it'll look like hell. So that's why we always say make the opening small, like inch and a quarter. There was some really curly ash, and I actually violated my curve a little bit, but I didn't want to lose the figure. So every once in a while, you might cheat the form a little bit. It's not maybe as catenary as I'd like, but I love the green in it. Okay, more oak. Okay, then this trio, I sold them individually, but you can see curly, beautiful maple. You know, with some. It just pops when you put dye in it. And all the wood dyes I buy are from Mohawk Finishing. They're not cheap, they're pre-mixed. And I know you can buy the little bottle droppers of dye and mix your own. But what happens when you mix your own is you'll never be able to repeat that exact color again. It's hard to measure it out perfectly. And more often than not, when you're dyeing a piece, you're like, oh, I need a little bit more. You know, I didn't mix enough, and then that next batch is darker or lighter. So I love their colors, but I will vary them and mix them, but I know what I'm starting with. So I love their blue, I love their red, the yellows are good. So sometimes you just have to pay for the better product to get what you want. This was a famous piece for me because an architect bought it at a show in New Hope when I wasn't there. And then a year later, I ran into the guy again, and he's a world-famous architect out of Chicago, and he told me, he says, I absolutely love this piece. He said, I have it on my windowsill in my room, and when I wake up in the morning and the sun comes in, it's the first thing I see. I'm like, can I have you do a commercial for me? So he said he would like to sell my work in his showroom. And at the time, I didn't know architects could have showrooms. In some of the major cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, there's architect showrooms where high-end people go buy high-end furniture by appointment. Like couches from Italy that are $15,000 and lamps that are $20,000 or Nakashima tables that are in there. So he wanted to put some of my vases in there, and I said, okay, when can we start? So the nice thing was he saw that piece. When I ran into him, it was a year later, same show. He bought that piece. He took it back to his office, had it on his desk, and he said, we'll work a deal. In a week I'll send you contracts, I'll tell you what pieces I want, you tell me how much they cost. It was consignment, he wasn't buying anymore, but he did buy that piece. Wednesday he calls me. Didn't even make it a week, and he says, I need you to quote 6 pieces. Okay. What do you need? So he tells me which ones he wants. I said, what's going on? He says, I've had 4 of my customers try to buy this piece from me. You have to make more. He said, but I'm not selling them this damn piece. I'm taking it home before anyone else sees it. So long story short, after like a 3 or 4 year period with him, I sold a total of 24 pieces. And for some serious money. The last 8 pieces went to the Palace Casino in Las Vegas. And I sold them to him for $8,000. I mean, he sold them for $16,000. And they went into the chairman's suite. So someday I have to go out there and visit my piece. So, unfortunately, after about that run, I haven't heard from him in a couple of years. So I was like, that kind of dried up. So sometimes you get lucky and you run, you do the right thing at the right time, meet the right person, they buy, and then things dry up. So that was a nice venture. But what it did teach me was that coloring the pieces really has an effect. Okay, so here's this piece. When I originally made it, natural. Okay, pretty, right? Same piece with blue dye on it. Isn't that amazing?
Go back.
That?
Can you go back just so you can see it?
4.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Do it again. Close up. So it brought out the quilted figure, the dye. Okay? That's the message I want to give here. That if pieces with figure, if you dye them, you can quadruple their value if you do it right. Really makes a difference.
What's the
So-
wood on the red piece that he bought?
Oh, that was just sandblasted and dyed. It would have no figure.
Okay, but what is it? Is it oak or what?
Oh, yeah, that's oak, sorry. Yeah, that's red oak, that's sandblasted. He liked a really wide grain pattern to it. And again, it was in my Okabola series.
I like the grain, it's fantastic.
Isn't that great cool? Yeah, I just loved it. That's a good point. So what I do sometimes when I can find really wide grain, because I like that effect, and the only place to find really wide grain is down here at the bottom. It gets really wide, it spreads out. So it's much tighter in the middle, and it's still tight up here, but really down in here. So I found this treasure chest by using the stumps. Okay? Red 8 o'clock?
Quick question.
Shoot.
Is there a pith there, or are you
No,
avoiding
no,
a
that's
pith?
all end grain. Good question. If you look at the log, if we look at the end grain of the log, here's your pith. So I'm taking a large diameter, this piece, so I'm making my circle here.
Okay.
So that's an end grain. So you're getting this nice curved shape. That's what you're seeing here. So I think it's this way, right? So I think the pith would be over here or the other way. So that's what you're doing. So you're getting a section of the curves and it gives it a nice cool effect. If you get in really tight, the lines are tighter, they're nice, but I like the wider lines. Hopefully
I got one question.
So again, playing with grain location can make a difference.
Andy, do you sell most of your pieces singly? You ever make sets? You ever sell 2 or 3?
Unfortunately, I never have.
You know,
I tried, but they don't seem to buy sets.
that's what I was wondering.
I know, I really pushed it and it never worked.
Well, I
Unfortunately.
correct you, Andy, you sold a set of 8.
Well, correct. I'll take that correction.
I'm still
any day.
jealous.
I'll take that correction any day.
That sounds like a private joke.
No, he was
Actually,
telling us
there's a
about
little bit of a
the 8.
joke because when I started my first exhibit, 2007, in New Hope, he goes, New Hope, you'll never sell anything up there. You know, they don't. The woodturners don't do too well. I sold 8 pieces. And Nakashima was the last one. He's like, I'll never say that again. So then he starts applying, and then he starts selling up there too. So he pretty much sells something every year. A couple years he missed, but so that was always kind of like a joke between us. Okay, now look at this piece. Same idea. You can see something's happening, right? You see that? Like cloudiness? That's figure. Okay, that's not bad sanding or anything like that. That's after I put 6 coats of oil on that, right? Interesting, right? But watch it with color. Bam, okay? He bought that right away. He saw it at the architects. He turned around and sold that right away. So, I mean, huge, look at it, a huge difference, right? Not bad, wow factor. That's what I'm looking for, wow factor. And that was the one he bought for himself. And I called it Blue Lagoon because it looked like little fishes. You see it? That's the ambrosia lines that we all love, right? When you dye something like this, if you leave too much dye on it, you lose all that. And you lose the figure. So the key is to brush it on lightly and to sand off maybe half of it. You have to look at it. You look at it and it looks a weird color. Okay, anytime you dye, okay, the final color is a combination of the dye plus the oil, and oil is always amber. So if I put a blue dye on and I put an amber on top of it, I get a blue-green, close to green. So you have to think about that. When you put the dye on, it looks really bad. It gives you a weird shade of blue. So you have to always test it on samples before you get used to doing this. Because you're thinking, oh no, I really messed it up. And then you put the oil on it, you go, oh wow, now it really pops. But if you leave too much dye on it, you hide the figure that you did all the work to get. So that's what I learned and mastered in doing my coloring.
So when you dye it, do you let the dye dry, then sand, or do you?
Yes, you let it dry, but it doesn't take long at all because I use alcohol-based dyes.
Ah,
And I like the alcohol because I'm not adding water back into the vase that might make it crack. And the alcohol evaporates real quick. So that's the other trick. If you wet this down, you're going to crack it, especially at an 1/8 inch thin.
Can you go back 2 slides?
Sure.
So the natural, sorry, one more. So that natural has the oil, you said 6 coats of oil?
Yes.
And then later.
So I decided to sand it off.
So you sanded the
Yeah,
oil.
so I had this, it didn't sell, and then I went, I'm going to dye that piece. So I sanded off all the finish and applied the dye and then put 6 coats of finish on top of that.
How deep does that oil?
Doesn't really go that deep.
No. So you
No,
have to take
I think I sanded it down with 220. I mean, you gotta use a lot of 220 because it gums up.
Right.
If you go heavier, then you put scratches in, and then, you gotta get them all out again. So it's a pain in the butt to do that, to redo it. It's much better if you do
use
it.
alcohol to
Yeah.
try to remove that oil rather than sanding it?
Doesn't really pull it too well, and you wanna get it all out, because you don't want to be spotty with the dye. Okay. You can have, like, I put the dye like I painted on, so it's not too, it's thin and thick, and it looks, gives more contrast. You can see here, like, it's darker here, lighter here. That's completely intentional. I want it to look like it's painted on, and I want it to give it some movement. I don't want it to be solid. That's the biggest mistake most people make with dyes, is that it looks solid and bland. And you want it to look like it's graded, like you painted it, like you did a mural, you put layers of paint down.
So the dye won't go on the oil, but oil will go on top of the dye.
Yeah, oil go on top of the
And the
dye.
oil helps, like, so that, how many layers of oil did you do on top?
I'd probably 5 or 6 on that, yeah,
And that
make it
will
shiny. It kind of
shine,
seals it and
seals
darkens
it.
it, yeah.
Smooth, like, I mean, so is it like a, as far as the finish, does it feel like your
It's
pens
smooth.
with the CA, is it that glassy, or is it?
No, it's softer than a CA finish would be,
Okay.
yeah. But it's still shiny. It's not super glossy, but it's shiny.
You
The
buff-
more oil you put on, the shinier it'll get.
And you
build
buff
up.
it? Or-
You then buffed it, yes, yes. So it's
When
nice
you-
and smooth when you touch it.
When you change a finish like that, do you do it mounted on your lathe, or do you
Yes.
just do it
Yes,
off?
because now, it's a really good question, because now I gotta be careful I don't break this thing. Now it's really fragile, so what I do is, I use the, I forget the name of the tool, you put it down through with the spindle on the end, and it actually squeezes the bottom. I forget the name, it's been a long time. On the lathe, so basically I'm squeezing the bottom lightly and guiding the top, and that's basically how I form the bottom when I'm making it. So you have to be very, very careful. Then I won't turn the lathe on. I'll just hold it on the lathe and turn it by hand and sand it. And then I'll get to a point where it gets cumbersome, I'll take it off and I'll put it on a couple bean bags. Another good thing you can do is you can take sawdust, you can take wood chips and put it in a sock. And basically make the long socks you could lay down. And you tie the ends and then wrap them up. They work like a bean bag. I even take leftover grit, like walnut shell grits from my sandblaster and made socks out of it. So yeah, you gotta be real careful when you do that. So the best thing is do it all from the beginning. But again, it was a learning process. I was like, hey, I got all these natural bases. I did all this work and they're not selling. What can I do with them? So that was one of the. So the big message here is one of our problems, as most of us started out as woodworkers. So we're used to finishes that are tan, brown, black, or white. But boy, when we were kids, we played with a whole box of crayons, right? And we wanted more colors. We need to do more of that as wood turners, woodworkers, and all that. Add color to it. But be careful with the color. I don't like flashy colors. My colors are conservatives. I like dark red, dark blue, dark greens, black, because they're appealing. When you start getting to the real light colors, then you limit how many people will like the piece. So that's the problem with color. Like, oh, your blue piece, nice, but I really wish it was red. What are you gonna do? But if it's pink, they're like, oh, I don't like the pink at all, it won't never sell. So you have to be careful that you find a palette that's appealing to most. Otherwise, you'll have a nice collection on your own. So that's the tough part about color. It's always a risk. This is a maple piece. I just sold that this weekend. That was kind of cool. Okay, then I start saying, all right, let's play with sculptural shapes. The message I want to tell you tonight about sculpture work. One of the reasons I went into more sculptural forms is that I realized as turning clubs and organizations, we've gotten really good at our tools, our videotapes, out of our instructions, and our demonstrations. So if I was to start today from scratch, like I did in 2005, whenever it was, I could get up that learning curve real fast. I had to learn a lot of things that weren't information that wasn't available when I started. So what I'm saying is if you have some good creative talent, you can get up that curve real fast. Now what's happening, if you go to Instant Gallery at an AEW symposium, you'll see, you can almost tell who the people copied their work from or learned from. And that's okay as long as they're not selling it. But they haven't developed their own styles. But there's very little left, I think, in the wood turning world that hasn't been done already. And there's always people that'll come out and find something new, but there's not a lot left. So what I concluded was that if I do sculptural pieces, the world's wide open. It's limited to your imagination. So what I started with was, this was actually a vase. So I turned a hollow form, and then I made a rig and I bandsaw sliced it, okay? I did a solid a solid form that looks like a hollow form, but I didn't hollow it. Sliced it on a bandsaw on a special rig so I didn't cut my arm off, and then I carved out the center. And then I did my die work. Then I did my sandblasting, die work, and liming work. So I reused techniques that I did on my vases now on my sculptures. So the idea was, all these things I've developed on my vessel work could be applied to a different form. And I just had to come up with different forms. So that was like, now the field is open, at least in my mind, what could be done. So then here it is in white, white, bleached white, and then black patinating wax. This was white oak, which gave you really tight grain, and you can see these are the medullary rays. So I really like that effect. So I'll use that in other sculptures. Again, a vase, turned solid, and then bandsawed, and then carved out. Then I went back to carving through the vessel, and I call that my Shadow Catcher series. And a collector, I think my very first wood collector bought that. And then that one also sold. And then this was one of my favorites, and never sold. I got really close a couple times, and I'm thinking, you know what, I'm not going to put that in a show anymore. I'm going to keep that one. Because my wife really likes it too. And so I call that Shadow Catcher 2. And then, again, building resume. Join Collectors of Wood Art, put my work up there, put my pictures up there, get my name out there. Constantly have to be self-promoting yourself to even have a chance to make a name for yourself to sell. Very difficult thing to do, but fun. Again, I went back to the sail shape, a sail on a sailboat. And I said, well, this time, Sam, I'm going to carve the grain, go in deeper. So that has a different textural effect when you run your hand over it, because it's deeper and you can sandblast it. Again, building on ideas that I already did, but taking them another step further. And I said, all right, what if I slice it all the way through? A shape like that, slice through those grains. And then I came up with a whole nother series, and then rotate them, pin them back. Same color process. My Okabola, right? Dyed black, dyed red, sand back, sandblast, all that. So I started making three-dimensional forms that were first turned, and then I banded the turning. I bought a big bandsaw. This will cut almost 16 inches, resaw. Okay? And that's about a 5 horsepower motor. I pushed that to its limit, and I've broken, I don't know, $400 or $500 worth of blades on it probably, until I found out what really works. Another one, same, one piece of wood, okay? Now this was all I bandsaw a curve, okay? And then I lay the curve down and I bandsaw it the other way. Pull the pieces apart, pin them, rotate them, glue them back together. So now I got a three-dimensional form that's moving. So as an engineer, I like things that move. I wanted to add, a lot of wood sculpture is static. I want it dynamic. I want it to move. So this was a piece of really curly maple that I dyed black, sanded it back, and all the figure pops out. And then rotate it, repin them all back together. And they're pinned and offset. And they're actually tapered too. So I spent like 6 months developing a rig on my bandsaw that I could take a billet this large, that I could barely lift, and rotate it through safely with the blade 16 inches high. But very safe, everything fixtured. And I would never show anyone because you'd cut your arm off if you did it. If you didn't do everything I showed you how to do. But I came up with a way to do it and then sand all those pieces and repin them. So all the joints are real tight joinery. That's all a bunch of that. Part of the inspiration came from Santiago Calatrava. I loved his, everything seems to move, open, airiness. That inspired me. So really, I really haven't had any wood turners inspire my work. I've had architects, bits and pieces of here and there. Really, I'm inspired by shapes. Scott had some real good pictures of this the other day, you showed me, right? I mean, you had some nice
Yeah.
pictures of the inside of this. I love this shape.
He's really amazing.
He's amazing. It's very skeletal shapes. So again, movement. I made this piece. I issue a calendar every year. I've been doing it for about 10 years. Different piece, different month. All nice photos. And I have a guy at work, he takes care of our buildings, and he's been buying my vases for like 5, 6 years. So I gave him the new calendar, he goes, and this was on the front page, he goes, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, it's my new sculpture." He goes, "Oh, I love that." I said, "I can bring it over and show it to you." So I brought it over to his house, and he bought it. Boom. So one of the very first ones I made, he bought. So you never know. You know, someone, they're buying vases, and you think, oh, that's all they like, and you show them something new, they may or may not like it. So that was kind of cool. I did a total of 6 of those. That series was very successful for me.
How big is that piece?
It's about 2 foot cube. And you can, oh, and, okay, these are fixed, even though they're rotated, but the 2 pieces you can pull apart like fingers, and you can interlock them any way you want. So you can, it's a dynamic, doesn't move, but you can reorient the sculpture any way you want. Word for that, and I was in the magazine, Woodturner magazine. So that was the first time I'd gotten in. It was really cool, and I think it was like a $300 check or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Never sold it, but I really liked it. But I did another one like it and sold it. Okay, here's WOW. I was telling you about WOW. It's a good website. That was one of the pieces I made. I kept that one because it was too pretty. I was like, I'm not selling that. So then, on WOW, they have a couple famous woodturners from New Zealand that I got very friendly with over the years because they really liked my vessels, and we had a lot of emails back and forth. And they said, "Hey mate, why don't you come down and visit us?" So they kept sending me these pictures of basically paradise in my mind. And I went, I have to go see New Zealand. I really have to go. So for my 25th anniversary, Pat and I went, and I had a really good year. I said, screw it, spending the money. So I went and visited. So I got to visit down at Milford Sound, famous area in southern New Zealand. I mean, the scenic views just blew me away. This is Terry Scott. He's very well known. He's up in Auckland. He took me to Gordon Pembridge's home. I met Gordon. You know who Gordon Pembridge is? If you don't, look him up. I think he's one of the best woodturners in the world. What he does with painting and coloring and these gorgeous bowls. He does safari scenes on the bowl that'll blow your mind. But I know why he's so good. I saw his house. He's got murals everywhere. He was a painter first. He knows how to paint. He knows how to make figures. He translated that talent onto the wood and carved it and then painted it. So he's carving a very thin bowl, but giving like the trees and the animals depth in how he carves, and then he paints on top of them. They're like $15,000, $20,000 pieces, and worth it. I mean, I wouldn't buy it. I can't afford that. But I understand the value of it. It's fantastic. So I got to meet him, which was really cool. So that was one of the really cool spin-offs of all this. And we got to go all the cool places in New Zealand. They told us where to go. This is in the northern islands of New Zealand, just stunning. This piece was my first piece I sold at SOFA Chicago. It was a goal of mine. I said, I really want to get in SOFA Chicago. All the best artists get in there. And finally one year I got in and I sold. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. That was right up, actually that was even sweeter than selling it to Nakashima. So that was kind of, again, that's in my resume. There's an article on it, you know, all building resumes. And then I was invited to do a talk at the AEW. I've never demonstrated at the AEW. I stopped demonstrating at one point because I said I really want to focus on just the artwork. I love to demonstrate. I love to make wood chips fly and all that. I used to do hollow form demos. I just don't have the time with work. But I will get back to it someday when I retire. But in the meantime, they said, you want to come do a talk? I'm like, I don't know if I can talk for an hour. No problem. My wife said, you'll do it. So they write it up and put you in the book. So that was my one, 15 minutes of glory to get in the AEW panel. And then that was in an AEW exhibit. It's another one of the 2-piece. This one was up in New Hope, and that sold to a collector. And I didn't shoot this photo, but Christine at New Hope, she's excellent. She's the gallery coordinator setup. But she's really good photos, but look at the shadow effect. And that's what I'm shooting for in the 3 dimensions, is to get the shadows just right. And to get them right, you need highlights shooting down. So at home, I don't have tall ceilings to get that kind of light. So but she nailed it, so I was really loved that photo. That's another one. And then I started doing these as big one dimension, I mean this one's this tall. Okay, that's about that deep. That made it to sofa, didn't sell, there it was in the corner. Vin Poe was running that particular gallery and put it on the corner, which was really cool. Still have that one. And then that was another sofa CWA exhibit. So that was kind of, I hit my goal. Okay, so where am I going? My background is Italian, both sides. And both sides of my family, my grandparents are from L'Aquila. Okay, L'Aquila, and the Italians are noted for sculpture, especially stone sculpture, Michelangelo. I'm impressed by people who can do figurative sculpture. It blows me away. I personally don't want to do figurative sculpture. I want to do modern sculpture. Quite frankly, I like it better, it's easier. I can't imagine how much time they do. So I said, well, what if I start studying sculpture and take the fundamental shapes and do them out of wood? What if I made this out of wood, put the grain orientation up and down, sandblast it, color it, round the holes out, or put some figured piece? Why not do that? So again, I was looking at Pinterest, studying sculptures and ceramic shapes too, and going, if I make them thin enough, they won't crack. I can't do the big thick ones that they do in stone because wood will just crack over a certain dimension when it's wet going to dry. So that gave me the idea of saying, hey, I can do a couple series that way. So anyway, I started playing with that. So now I had to slice bigger slabs of wood. Okay. These are like 3-foot monsters I can barely pick up. Probably can't pick them up today. I'm about 10 years older now when I started that. But I have new tools for that, I'll show you. So then, there you go. Okay, a little different shape, but you get the idea, the whole, the negative space. But I sliced it on one of the flare-outs. Okay? So this flares out, but it does flare out in sections too. So I took an entire section and it had this fabulous medullary rays. Okay, I sliced it and went, wow. And I got to make sure I don't carve away the rays, but it still stayed. You can see as I went in deep, they were still there. So the piece really pops like that, and you can see it across the room. So I just did my black and tan treatment that I would do on a vase, but on a different shape. And then had to sand the shit out of it because it's, it's all round in different directions. So that's the only difference, is it's just a lot more work, but it's the same idea. So now you see me on a workbench, I have to do a lot more filing. Okay, wood turners don't file. I have to get a whole set of files. A few more hand tools, every type of sander imaginable. Oh, then I upgraded my workbench. This is really important. What was happening, I'm filing and I'm shaking the workbench. Probably, this is not bad, that's pretty heavy, or maybe the others are holding it. So I went out, I wanted a heavy duty bench. This is 350 pounds. I got it at Grizzly, it was about $1,000, which is about, not a bad price for that size. But the really important thing is, I bought a pattern maker's vise. Did you ever see a pattern maker's vise? It articulates. Like $300 or $400 vise worth every penny. So, basic vise on a hinge. You can flip the vise up and then you can rotate it and never take the piece out. You can clamp the piece and rotate the vise and still hold the piece. And then I can sand and file in all different directions that are comfortable. So that's what I'm doing there. I was getting the inside, so I kind of rotated it, angled a little bit, and I'm in there filing. So that really helped me out a lot. So when I came along and said there was a tool that could save time, I would buy it. So that's one of the finished pieces. That's a smaller one here. Okay, that's the one that's standing up. And that's what it looks like finished. Again, so sandblasted, dyed it black, but see there's two different colors here. I like to keep the sapwood in my pieces. I don't cut it away. If you're a woodworker, you want to get rid of the sapwood and you want to make sure everything looks the same color, right, if you're making a table. But as an artist, I want colors. So that's the sapwood, that's the heartwood, and it gives it a nice cool effect. All the same color, sandblasted, dyed it black, sanded it back, bang. It has a nice pop to it. And it's a sailboat shape. Again, that sailboat, sail idea, it's a pleasant form. And it's also curved. Oh, that's the other thing. This is curved. I got a nice clean curve on the back because I took my rig that I made to do the three-dimensional pieces, ran the block through on the curve, so I didn't have to carve the curve, I cut the curve. See what I'm saying? So again, I built on an idea that I had before to add to the next level that I want to go to. So everything builds on everything else. Same idea. This one actually goes out this way. And that's the sapwood, that's the heartwood, but left natural. Okay? And it's got really intense medullary rays, and you can really feel it like you run your fingers across it. That was in the last New Hope show. Okay, that was the bigger piece that was on the bench, and a doctor came along and bought that up at New Hope. So what I have, till 9 o'clock? Okay, I gotta be careful. Okay, this piece, dragon's wing, I call it. Looks like a dragon's wing, right? So then I started getting into texture. This is curved on the back. Again, that bandsaw rig. Took the billet through, curved on the back, curved on the front, and then I carved everything else out. But I do all power carving. I do very little hand carving. That's all done with Arbortech. I have every Arbortech tool they have. They're not all good, but a lot of them are really good. And I said, hey, why don't I make a leaf? Okay. Also curved. See the curve? Right there. So that gives it some movement, some motion. If it was straight, it wouldn't look as appealing. So, and it looks bronze. Okay. It has like a bronze look that I like. And sandblasted, dyed, the whole process. And then I've been working on some column ideas. Okay. That's about this big. Won an award for that. I haven't sold one of those yet, but I want to make them bigger. So I have all kinds of ideas. I just don't have all kinds of time. Red cedar log. It's a hollow form. Originally, this was closed in. I carved out a bowl on the top, carved out a bowl on the bottom, because I have to get the mass out or it'll just split when it dries, all wet. Burr it in this way, this way, this way, this way, and it's all convoluted and all sanded out. A lot of work. So that was in my last show. And then I went back and I opened it up because you couldn't see enough of the inside. So this is you should never really go back and redo a piece because it's always a big risk. But this was closed in and I wasn't getting in any shows, and I said, you need to see the inside. So I ended up went back and carved it out and refinished it. And a lot of people liked it. Didn't sell it, but a lot of people liked it. That's fine. Okay, then what year is about 8 years ago, I got involved in a program called Echo Lake, invitational only sculpture exhibit. I got involved and I went crazy with it. I said, this reinforced my sculpture idea. This is collaborative sculpture, and I do it every year. Actually, I'm starting my 8th year tomorrow. It's a 3-day seminar through Bucks County Community College. So that got me really excited. Here's where I'm using Arbortech. The 4.5 wheel has 3 cutters on it. Okay, so I'm carving out between the line patterns, ripping that out. Very dangerous work, by the way. I will tell you that. Really, don't try this at home. It's seriously, seriously dangerous. 5 times more dangerous than wood turning.
Doesn't that head have a plastic shield?
Yes. Yeah, so that's the first thing you have to take off. Because it makes it more dangerous.
Andy, you do any intarsia work, any of that?
No, I've never done that, but I respect people who do that, because I do love that. That's a little too intricate for me, you might say. Too intricate, right? Yeah, it's too intricate for me. But yes, I do love it. Okay, waves, water. Engineer, I work with water. Waterfalls, I love waterfalls. I said, all right, can I make the wood look like a waterfall? And that was my inspiration, nature. Okay? So I start carving wavy forms. I know how to find beautiful wood now. I know where to cut it in the tree. I know how to sandblast it. I know how to finish it. Change the shape and make something that moves. But don't just make it uniform, make it on angles. So that turned out to be very successful. I didn't sell it, but it was a very successful piece. Got a lot of good feedback on it. Spun more ideas. So there you see it. See the medullary rays? This is all sandblasted. And one of the cool things about this pin oak, this is not grain right here, that dark. It's a marble figure. When you look at the end of the log, it kind of goes back and forth over the grain lines for some reason. It's some kind of fungus that attacks it. but it gives you these beautiful colors. Ordinary wood that's thrown away every day, pin oak, that has beautiful figure and color in it. I'm always looking, I'm always slicing logs open, what's going on inside. Because someone's gonna burn it, throw it away. So just chop it up and start exploring what is in the tree. So that's from all those years of doing that, I'm like, oh, I know what wood to use for this idea. Yeah, so that's all, I have all those things figured out. So then I said, let's make a round lathe, okay? Now this is turned on the lathe. Well, this one wasn't yet. Okay, this was all done with a chainsaw and then carved out. But I have to remove the pith because it's going to destroy itself. This is the end slice of a log. It doesn't survive. It wants to go bink, split apart. So I went through experiments to figure out what you need to do to make that work. So here I am carving it out. There's no easy way of doing that, okay? But I did find a way to turn some of it away on the lathe. But you can just, I don't use the lathe anymore for these, but I pretty much, you can. And then you draw a line and you carve away everything you don't want. A lot of hours into those pieces. But they're completely different. Okay, you can see some of the wave here. This is a 7-inch disc, even more dangerous. Don't try that at home. It's even scary for me to do, and I have a lot of experience. Okay, I got injured. Never cut myself, but what I did wrong was working on a pile of logs, right? I was cutting the base, and I'm cutting it with a chainsaw with a 2-foot bar, and the log's moving. Okay, safe thing is, shut the chainsaw off, set it down. Turn it off, set it down, grab the log, lift it up. When you lift up something you can't pick up, it's going to move. My finger was too close to the next log, pinched it, jammed it, and your gut reaction is you pull away. I literally pulled the tip off my finger. So I couldn't use my hand for 2 months. They had a graft skin like they do on burn victims first, and then they had to cut a slice out of here and graft it on here. So this finger's maybe 1/8 of an inch shorter. You can't even tell now. Hurt like a mother. Your hands are very sensitive. And of course I beat myself up for months about how stupid I was to do that. I mean, I moved logs hundreds of times and been chainsawing for 10 years, but you can always make that one mistake. So you got to be on guard with these tools. And the carving tools are even more dangerous because, like those rotary cutters, what's dangerous about these, when you shut off the button, it keeps spinning. And you can't set the tool down until it stops spinning, because you can set it on your workbench and kick back on you. And you always use 2 hands. Never do it with 1 hand. So, yeah, I don't demonstrate how to do this because it's scary. You're going to start out small, work your way up. Okay, next idea. Had my cedar tree in my front of my house was growing into my porch. It was 30 feet high. Had to come down. So my tree guy, who gives me all this free wood, called him up. He charged me some ridiculously low price, took the tree down, of course saved the trunk for me. Okay, put the wet trunk in the woods in my pile. And for a couple days I kept looking at it, a piece about that high, and I kept looking at the pattern, and I went, that looks like a flower. Can I cut a flower out of it? No, you can't cut end grain. You're not supposed to carve end grain. It's going to just, when it dries, it's just going to split apart, right? The end of a log just slices and breaks. So I experimented with what you need to do to remove the pith, how much material to take out, how slow to dry. And after I broke about 6 of those, I figured out how to do it. And found out cedar was one of the harder ones to do. When I did it with oak, it cracked, but didn't crack all the way through. So again, I did all this experimentation. So you may say, okay, well, geez, he's charging $1,500 for that piece. Why? Well, you don't know that I've thrown away hundreds of hours of experiments and pieces that didn't work. The people buying it don't know that story and don't get to see my trash bin or my burn pile. But sometimes that's what you need to do something unique or different. And those are some of the crazy things I'll go to do it, because I want to figure it out. Because there's some benefit to it. So anyway, so I made it look like a flower. I carved it all out, a couple coats of oil. And then I got this left. It's the coolest picture in the world. These are beasts, right? And that's a 2-foot bar, okay? Just to give you a scale. So they were this big. When I got that baby, I was like, jackpot. Never saw a piece that big before. So that was kind of cool. And that went around the internet pretty well because they liked it. It's just so pretty color. But see, they look like flowers, don't they?
Oh,
Right? Look at the shape.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a flower. So how do you make a flower out of it? So that's natural inspiration. Then how do you do it? Because it's just going to crack 20 ways to Sunday if you don't do it right. You don't get it thin enough. So, okay. So I said, all right, make some flowers. Okay? This one is all scooped out this way. A little hard to see. So it's about a ½ inch thick in the middle and about 4 inches out here, but it maybe 3/4 in there. So basically, you figure like you routed it out, but I carved it out. And that survived and didn't crack. That was in an AEW exhibit last year. And then I said, all right, flower plus wavy flower. See, building on ideas. Wavy flower, right? This is actually turned. Okay? And if you read my AEW article, you'll see how I did it. Okay? Basically, I take a section of a log and scoop it in both sides. Then I draw my curve on the outside and then carve away everything else I don't want. And then after about 60 hours of work of carving, sanding, filing, and all that, I'm done. And then I paint the edges and finish it and all that. So.
How do you keep the red color for the color red?
Oh, really good question. The best color.
You got it back?
Yeah, you got it back.
The best color, you get $1 for that. The best color is at the end of the log. Do you ever notice? When you slice open a log, it's brilliant color. Most of the color is at the end of the log. When you slice it along the grain, it's still pretty, but it's more intense on the ends of the fiber. And then when you oil that, it's even more intense. So your cedar at the end of the log, when you oil it, will be darker than the cedar on the side grain like this. Okay?
That's right.
So that was the other thing I discovered, and playing with end grain. I'm like, oh, it's a bitch to carve. You're not supposed to carve it. It wants to crack. But the color is fantastic. Okay?
Doesn't all wood over time, though, even that red turn to brown?
It might turn to brown, but they haven't yet. Because I think it's so intense. It's darkened, though. It was a lighter red, but it's still a dark red. So I don't know if that will ever go to brown. If it was side grain, it might. There's a good chance of it.
You have
So
a
I was
fireplace
hopeful
at
of
home, Andy?
that. Oh, look at that, it's ambrosia maple.
You have a fireplace at home?
Yes,
Do you?
absolutely. I don't use it enough because I have a lot of scrap. But look at that piece of ambrosia. Now, someone said, oh, that's nice, somebody said, and they sent me a picture of this highly decorated ambrosia. And I said, well, that's nice, but it doesn't have enough
Good
contrast.
stuff in it.
So I need enough sapwood to contrast with the dark wood. See what I mean? If it's overpopulated with these veins of color, then it doesn't look as good. It'll still be pretty. So I'm always looking for that contrast. And then I paint the ends to look like bark, and so your eye can follow the curve. And then that's one of my unique features. No one else does that. So if you see, and no one else makes these yet, but that's my signature. So what can you do to your piece to make it your own? Has anyone ever seen Brad Sell's work? He does all these carved bowls. He's unbelievable. He carves, so he'll carve a little bowl on the edge, and that's his signature. Instead of taking all that out, he'll leave a little bowl shape on the edge, and that's his signature. So he knows that's his piece. No one else does it. So if you can do that and add to your piece, So that's kind of, because I was going to stop doing this, and I said, no, that's mine. I went painted it, and I get the right colors of paint to match the bark. So little things like that can make you different from everyone else. So this was the article, October, AEW Magazine, first article in AEW, thrilled to death. The editor came to me and said, you're long overdue. And I said, I really like you. I'm going to buy you dinner. But anyway, so those are my pieces. Spalted maple. Spalting is more intense on the end of the log, right? Every time you cut it, that's when you first find the log, you cut the end. Oh man, look at the lines. I mean, they're nice along the length, but they're more intense on the end of the grain, end grain. Much, much harder to sand. So that piece sold. Oh, the magazine came out. The day the magazine came out, a collector called me up and said, I want that piece full price back. I'm like, I got to get more articles. It was such a cool thing. I was like, that doesn't happen. It happened. You see that right there? That's the shape. See how I scoop it in? On both sides. on the lathe. Then I draw my pattern on the outside, and then I carve away everything else. And I gotta be careful when I don't blow through the other side. And I use those
Pith
feeler
out
gauges
there
all the
now?
time. What's
Is
that?
the pith out?
The pith's out, yeah. So that's the other thing, I take the pith out because that's where the most stress is. And it's gotta move. It'll crack right out. So that was cool. And then, okay, same idea, Coca-Cola colors. Started with a flower, wavy flower, but morphed into movement. By making the lobes asymmetric, they look like they're moving now, right? Looks like a creature. So one series morphs to the other, building on the ideas. That's what I'm saying. So once you start getting some good ideas, you can apply them to different shapes. And then I paint the edge black again. Yeah.
So it's not a flower laying down.
Right. You can call it a flower if you buy it, whatever you want. But the idea, the vision of it, it's a creature moving, right?
Wow.
Or you can turn it sideways too.
Jellyfish.
And you can take these, I have my next series where I put a hook on the back and I can hang them on the wall. And we'll talk about that briefly. I'm running out of time, aren't I? Okay, I gotta keep moving. Okay. And it's extreme. Okay? Cut that on an angle. I didn't even turn this on the lathe. That's all carved out. Oak. Sandblasted. Medullary rays. Really pops, right? Just sold that Saturday. The sister piece to this is going to be an AEW show. So that was a hell of a lot of work, but it paid off. That's the sister piece that's in the AEW continuing shape. Okay? See the rays? Everything I learned about medullary rays, sandblasting oak, coloring it? Okay. Then I went vertical. Can you see the evolution? Wave idea. Take the wave, unravel it, and stretch it. So that's how I think in my three-dimensional mind. I say, okay, I had a round, stretch it, it becomes a ribbon. Shitload more work, because now it's totally freeform. I don't know what I spent on that one, 60, 70 hours of carving, sanding, sandblasting, color. But that's 3 foot high.
So if you went back to your tree diagram.
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
I had to need a big slab, so I took a big slab out of the bottom.
All right.
And I like the wider grain from the bottom. Good question. So that's where I get that. So that was a billet like this and then 3 foot tall. I could hardly pick it up. It has to be soaking wet, the whole thing done soaking wet. Have to get it down to 3/4 or less thickness so it doesn't crack. Same problem. No pith, but it will crack. You're allowed to have cracks in sculpture, but you want to minimize them. So when I get them, I have one down here, I fill it with colored epoxy. So it's just blends in. I mean, if you really look for it, you'll find it and won't bother you, but it blends in with
Is any of that shape due to the drying effect of the
Nope.
wood?
Nope, not at all. Not at all. That's all carved and pulled my hair out and say, well, I want it to go this way, and shave, you know. Drawing lines, sketching lines, trying to figure that out. Probably the hardest piece I ever made. Most challenging. So then I said, all right, we'll do it natural oak, because some people don't like color. So that was like the third one I made. That's probably one, again, 3 foot tall. That was in the New Hope show.
Sorry, maybe you said, are those carved wet?
All 100%, everything I do is 100% wet, okay? Or it'll crack. So any large billet, when it dries, it will crack on the end and destroy itself, basically. So I want to minimize cracks. You're allowed to have a couple. Okay. See how this one evolved? Wave idea, all right? But now it's on the wall. I've been wanting to develop a series that will mount on the wall because the argument's always been people have more room on the walls than they have on their shelves and with pedestals.
Yeah.
And if they don't have room on the wall and they really like what you're doing, they'll take a photo down and put it up.
Have you ever done them as a light fixture?
No, I haven't done lights fixtures, but that's not a bad idea either.
Andy,
Because everyone likes light fixtures.
what is your #1 wood of preference? What kind of wood do you like the most to work with?
Mostly now it's oak, believe it or not.
What
Because
kind?
I can do so much color, sandblasting, and grain pop and all that kind of stuff.
What kind?
Red oak. White oak's a little tight, it's still pretty, but the red oak is more workable from the texture point of view. I really, and it's totally abundant around here, so that's a gimme for me. Okay, here's a piece of spalted red oak. I did everything right. It dried for 2 weeks, and then one day I went down and went, bink. So I had enough residual stress and the wood's weak because it's faulted that it popped open and had left a crack. So I just cut it wide open and I stitched it. And I put that in the show and I had more comments on it. I'm surprised it didn't sell. People like that, but the wood was so beautiful.
Andy, is that because you're leaving the hole for the pit much smaller now?
No, it just had the residual stress in it. Like I said, everything worked right, it was just the wood was weaker. So there's a limit to spalted wood, how far you can push it on end grain. Okay, this one's 2 foot diameter. A wall piece hangs on the wall, wave idea. Same idea, dyed, sanded back, but now I sanded it back with a disc sander and I took chunks out of it. But you see all these lines? Medullary rays. Medullary rays, you know what medullary rays are, right? They start in the center of the tree and they go out radially. So now I'm using those lines to add to the color to the figure. It becomes free figure, basically, because I colored it.
What's the difference between medullary rays and chatoyance?
Chatoyance, like a cat eye, is usually figure. Medullary rays are raised, I don't think nutrients travel in them. Every type of wood has them, you just can't see them in most woods. Oak, they're prevalent. Familiar with mission-style furniture, where they fume it with oak? Those flecks are medullary rays that go out radially. And they cut them on the quarter sawn right on the lines. So if you're got a piece of oak from the pith, there's thousands of these rays going out radially. So they cut their boards, like right here, where those rays are almost flat. So that, and then they get big. So that's what you're seeing here, except in the other plane, I'm taking the die off and I'm showing those rays. So this would look interesting if it was side grain. It's much more interesting being end grain. Okay, much more likely to break and fall apart. So these may go to a new gallery that I just signed up with. Same idea, 2 foot diameter, end grain. I draw thousands and thousands of lines in my lifetime as an engineer. I draw everything on drawings. So I said, I'm going to carve between the lines. That was my inspiration. Draw a bunch of lines, gouge out the center, color it, do all my tricks to it. So that was the inspiration for this. Just applying something that I've done. The key is, I can't be more than 3/4 thick. It's got a shape to it. So I have to back cut all the high spots. So if you flip that over, all the ridges are valleys on the backside. Or it'll destroy itself. So again, applying all those techniques to a different shape. So that's the kind of fun stuff I'm having now. I'm really building on things I've done before. Okay, did a bunch of East Coast flights. Flew over the Rocky Mountains, said click and click, click, couple photos. I like the ridges. It's all mountain view. These are all ridges. Same idea. You flip it over, you have to carve out the back. Now the random shapes, so I draw them on a plotter, lay the plotted piece, because it's 2 foot by 2 foot. Sketch all the lines, flip the piece over, sketch the lines on the back. So the lines on the front, cut between them. The lines on the back, cut the lines. Hills and valleys, that's the idea. Then the piece won't destroy itself. So the pith somewhere buried in here, fill it with epoxy, color it, you don't even know it's there. But all the rays are there. When you look at this close, you'll see all these cool white lines. So that's, again, all the things I've learned applying a different shape. This was the New Hope Arts show that I was fortunate to be in. I was invited. All the shows have always been jury. So myself and Noreen Kavlovic, who does wall art, she does these beautiful bamboo wall parts, and she did all these wall pieces. We each had 34 pieces, and the show was 3 weeks, 3 weekends. So that was in April, May. And we had 68 pieces total, and really had a nice turnout. So these are all my, all my sculptures all the pedestal pieces are mine, and then not some of my wall pieces up there. So that was a huge, huge honor. Didn't sell anything, but I got one person who was interested in my work to come to the show, and she loved it. Next step, wave idea. The base of the tree goes like this, right? Remember the cedar piece? What if I put a wave on it? What does it become? A star. A wavy star, right? So that's how my mind's thinking. But I can't pick up that piece. It's 170 pounds. So I went out and bought a trailer hitch. If it could save me times, but more importantly, this will save my back. I can roll this piece, I can cut it and roll it, but I can't lift it. So I can lift up to 1,000 pounds on one point and 500 at the end, drop it on my back of my truck. Okay? And then once I get home, I bought a big wheelbarrow at Home Depot. It's like almost fiberglass, it looks like, a Rubbermaid one. And it's really heavy duty, but the thing is it's not metal, so I put a piece of wood on it, and I lay this on its side, sticking out of the wheelbarrow, and I carve it with the chainsaw. I rough it out with the chainsaw till I can, gets enough weight out that I can lift. So here's the same piece, look at that ambrosia weight, right? Isn't that beautiful? Really intense. And then, this is not finished. And I still have to sand it more, but this is what it looks like now. See how it looks like a star shape? The picture's lousy, I just took a quick photo without the right lights. But this is 8 inches deep. This is 3 foot by 3 foot. You see the ambrosia? And that's not even finished. That's not even sanded. See how intense it is? So when I hit that with bush oil, it's going to go pop. It's going to look like some of the other ambrosia pieces. But I have to take my time, and I have to sand it out. But I don't want to sand away the texture. I don't want to sand away these facets. I mean, I could sand it all smooth, but I don't want to do that. I want it to look textured but still smooth. So I have to sand out the tear out. So I got some special tools for that too. So that's where I'm going next. And that's an oak one, 3 foot by 3 foot. This one had a lot of black in it. It was sitting on the ground too long, so I bleached it. So right now it's kind of like a yellowish color, sapwood and hardwood. So I'm going to dye it black and do that black and tan technique I did. So it'll be a star. So it's a wavy star. So the message here is that
So you're reaching for the stars.
reaching for the star. And I would like to be a star and sell stuff like Chihuly, but that's never going to happen. So, but anyway, it's all fun for me. It's not my job. It's a wonderful second career. It's got me to go around the world. I've gotten to know all kinds of people in all different countries that I would never have had the opportunity to. But I've busted my ass, and I don't mind. I really enjoy the journey and the process, and it keeps I get bored fast, so it keeps me going. So that's kind of my message. So you can take from here ideas, what you can do with your own work, and just wanted to show you the process of how I built on one idea onto another. And when you look at another artist's work that sells his work, if you look at his catalog of what he's done, you can kind of figure out what he did first and how he built on it. One idea built on another. Like, you go in the AW, you see these complicated pieces. You know he spent hundreds of hours. How did he get there? Well, he didn't start there. He started out simple and built like you would build an engine. You would start out very, very simple in order until it's complicated.
The brand of dye that you use again?
It's Mohawk Finishing Dyes.
Mohawk, and where do you get it? Online?
Online, you can look it up, yeah. It's a huge company. Mohawk does all the refinishing all the refinishing, touch-up stuff for dining room tables.
And then bush oil?
And bush oil, that's up in New York somewhere. Philippines probably. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it, but thank you for having me.